Modern Unsolved Disappearances, Calm Stories for Sleep. Welcome, wherever you are right now, in whatever room or space you have arranged yourself for this quiet time. You can allow your body to become just a little heavier, a little more still, a little more at ease with the surface that is holding you. Perhaps you are lying down already, your head resting softly against something familiar, a pillow that carries the particular warmth and impression of all the times you have rested here before. Perhaps the room around you is dim or fully dark, the shapes of ordinary things reduced to soft suggestions of themselves, the sounds of the day already beginning to soften and recede into a comfortable kind of distance. There is nothing you need to do right now. There is truly nowhere you need to be. The hours that lie ahead belong entirely to rest, to the slow and generous work of sleep, and whatever thoughts may have been moving through your mind today, the small concerns, the unfinished things, the memories and plans and passing worries, all of them can slowly and without any effort on your part at all, simply begin to drift. Tonight we are going to spend some time together with stories, quiet stories, the kind that are less concerned with answers than they are with the gentle, unhurried act of simply paying attention to something, of following a thread through a series of ordinary moments and then arriving, softly, at the place where the thread becomes unclear and eventually disappears. These are stories about real people, ordinary people who live their lives in much the same way that most people live their lives, moving through their days with routines and small habits and familiar rituals, with people they loved and work they were committed to, and who, at some particular point in time, stepped quietly out of the frame of what was known and into a space that has never quite been fully explained. There is no drama in the way we will hold these stories tonight. There is no urgency, no building tension, nothing sharp waiting at the end of a sentence. These are simply accounts, offered quietly and carefully, held with a kind of steady and open and genuinely curious attention. The cases we will visit together tonight come from the late 20th and early 21st centuries. They come from different parts of the world, from different kinds of lives, from different sets of circumstances and different landscapes and different seasons. What they share is a certain quality of unresolved stillness, the quality of a question that has been asked and that has not yet found its answer, a question that can remain open across years and even across decades without pressing itself on you in any urgent way, without demanding anything from you at this particular hour. These mysteries will still be resting exactly where they are tomorrow, in the day after that, and all the days beyond. They are held gently by the people who love these individuals, by the friends and family members who have carried them quietly through the years, and by the investigators who have kept their notes in files and folders, and by the researchers who return to the details from time to time with fresh and careful eyes. None of that ongoing, patient work asks anything of you right now. Your only task at this moment is to breathe, to let the weight of your arms and your legs and all the small muscles of your face and your shoulders settle just a little further into whatever is holding you. To listen, not with any purposeful attention, but with the same soft and half-present openness you might give to the sound of rain moving steadily against a window at night, or to the low and distant sound of someone speaking in another room, or to wind moving through trees somewhere outside. Not demanding anything, not forming anything you need to understand or hold. Let the words simply pass over you. Let your mind follow them loosely and without gripping, the way you might watch clouds move across a sky without feeling any need to track where they are going. And when sleep comes, and it will come, it always does, let it carry you gently and without resistance away from the words and the stories, the way a slow and quiet current carries something downstream in the middle of the night, softly and without any sound at all. Case 1, Brian Schaffer, Columbus, Ohio, 2006. Brian Schaffer was 27 years old in the spring of 2006, and by most accounts he was the kind of person who moved through the world with a certain quiet steadiness, a kind of dependable and undemonstrative presence that the people around him found easy and comfortable. He was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University, studying with the intention of eventually becoming a doctor, and the people who knew him described him as someone who was focused and genuinely kind. someone who laughed easily and without effort, and who took his work seriously while not allowing that seriousness to weigh on the people around him. He had grown up in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of Midwestern place where the streets are wide and lined with trees, and the seasons arrive with a steady and reliable rhythm that gives a year its shape. The full heat of summer softening gradually into the particular golden quality of an Ohio autumn, the way the light changes in October and becomes something lower and more amber, and then the long and quiet gray winters that settle over that part of the country like a soft covering, muffling sound and slowing everything down into a gentle kind of stillness. In the weeks and months before his disappearance, Brian had been carrying the particular kind of grief that settles quietly into a person and slowly changes the texture of the ordinary days around it. His mother, Renee, had passed away in February of that year after an illness, and Brian was in the way that people are when they are grieving and also still living their lives, still attending classes, still making plans, still imagining a future, somewhere in the patient and difficult middle of processing something large and quiet and ongoing. He had a girlfriend named Alexis Walrab, with whom he was close and of whom he spoke with warmth and genuine affection. He had a father he was close to. He had a small circle of friends he went out with on weekends, people who knew him well and valued his company. His life from the outside had the shape and texture of the ordinary, somewhat pressured life of a young person who was working hard to become something, who was carrying both sorrow and hope in the way that people generally do, without much visible ceremony. On the evening of March the 31st, 2006, Brian went out with two friends to mark the end of a difficult academic term. A modest celebration, the kind that happens in cities all the time. 2 or 3 people finding their way to a familiar place to be somewhere other than where they had been studying and working. They went to a bar called Ugly Tuna Saloona, which was situated within a larger shopping and entertainment complex in downtown Columbus called the Arena District. The evening was a Friday, and the bars and gathering places in that part of the city would have been full of the particular ambient energy of an end-of-week evening. Groups of people moving through warm interiors, the low, continuous hum of conversation and music, the kind of easy, generalized noise that fills a social space and makes it feel both busy and somehow private at the same time. Brian was with people he knew. He was in a place that was not unfamiliar to him. There was, as far as anyone present could tell, nothing about the early part of the evening that was in any way out of the ordinary. At some point in the course of the night, Brian stepped away from his friends. This is the kind of thing that happens naturally in a crowded and busy space. A person moves to find the bar, to use the restroom, to step briefly outside for some air, and the small separation does not register as anything other than the ordinary movement of an evening. His friends did not initially notice his absence as anything requiring attention. It was only as the night moved on and Brian continued not to return that a kind of mild searching began, and eventually the friends left without him, working on the reasonable assumption that perhaps he had met someone he knew and had made his own quiet way home. He was not at home the following morning. He did not respond to calls, and the people who cared about him began to understand, gradually and then with increasing weight, that something had changed. The investigation that followed turned very largely on the security camera footage from the Ugly Tuna Saloona and from the complex of buildings and entrances around it. That footage showed Brian near the entrance to the bar, pausing to exchange a few brief words with 2 women he did not appear to know, and then turning and walking back into the building. And then there was a detail that investigators returned to many times over the years that followed. There was simply no footage of Brian leaving. The security cameras positioned at the exits recorded the departure of virtually every other person who left the building that evening, but Brian Schaffer was not among the figures they captured. There was no image of him walking out through any of the visible exits. No image of him in a stairwell or an elevator lobby. No image of him stepping into a taxi or walking out into the Columbus night. He walked back into the building, and then the cameras, with their patient and indifferent recording, offered no further account of him at all. The building was carefully searched. The surrounding streets and the broader neighborhood were searched. His phone records and his bank records and the detailed recollections of everyone who had been in his company that evening were all examined at considerable length over the days and weeks, and eventually the years that followed. His girlfriend spoke with investigators. His friends were interviewed multiple times. His father became involved in efforts to find answers. Leads were followed to the places where they went, and some of them went nowhere in particular, and the case remained open. Over the years since 2006, various theories have been proposed and turned over and examined. The way that theories tend to accumulate around a case that cannot be resolved. Some researchers have focused on the physical configuration of the building, wondering about maintenance corridors or service routes or spaces that the security cameras did not cover. Some have suggested that Brian may have made a deliberate choice to step away from his life and begin again somewhere else, though the people who loved him found this very difficult to bring into alignment with who they knew him to be. Others have arrived at the simpler and perhaps more honest position of saying that they do not know, and that not knowing is something they have, over time, learned how to carry. His father, Randy Schaffer, spent the years following Brian's disappearance conducting his own investigations, maintaining a presence in the public conversation around the case, holding open the possibility that someone might one day come forward with something new. Randy passed away in 2008, 2 years after his son disappeared, without having found the answer he had been looking for. The case remains open. The questions are still there, resting patiently wherever questions rest. In a file folder somewhere, in the memory of people who knew Brian, in the steady and unhurried attention of whoever thinks about it next. There is something quietly and genuinely human about a disappearance like this one. The way an entirely ordinary Friday evening, the kind of evening that unfolds in thousands of cities, on the thousands of Fridays without consequence, can become the last known moment of someone's presence in the visible world. Brian Schaffer was a person moving through the middle of a life, carrying grief and hope alongside each other in the ordinary way that people do. And then he moved into a space the cameras could not follow, and he has remained there. We hold his story with great gentleness, without any need to resolve it tonight, and we allow it simply to rest. Case 2, Maura Murray, New Hampshire, 2004. Maura Murray was 21 years old in February of 2004, and she carried within her what might be described as a rich and somewhat complicated interior life, running quietly beneath the more visible and structured surface of her days. She was a student at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, studying nursing, and she had previously attended the United States Military Academy at West Point, where she had also been a competitive runner, someone whose physical discipline and capacity for sustained effort were evident in the way she moved through the demanding environment of that institution. She was, by the accounts of people who knew her well, a person of real capability, someone who was athletic and serious about her studies and also warm and funny in the way that people who are under a great deal of pressure sometimes are. The humor a kind of soft valve for everything that is being held. In the days immediately preceding her disappearance, there were certain details that would later be gathered and examined very carefully by the investigators and researchers who took an interest in her case. She had been involved in a minor car accident in her father's vehicle a few days before she disappeared. She had sent an email to her professor and separately to her employer, telling each of them that she would need to be away for approximately a week due to a family emergency, though no such emergency had occurred. She had made a cash withdrawal of around $280 from her bank account. She had packed a bag. These are the kinds of small, practical details that, arranged in a sequence, have a particular quality to them. They suggest a person in the process of preparing for a departure of some kind, attending quietly to the logistics of being gone. On the evening of February 9, 2004, Maura was driving north along Route 112 through Haverhill, New Hampshire, a rural and sparsely populated stretch of road in the northern part of the state where the landscape in February is defined by forest and softly rolling hills and the deep, encompassing quiet of a cold winter night. The road winds through a region where the distances between houses and buildings are long and where the darkness after nightfall is the particular kind of deep and settled darkness that comes when there are very few lights and the cloud cover has closed over whatever the moon might otherwise provide. It is the kind of road that is beautiful in a still and undramatic way. The trees coming close on both sides, the occasional pale open space of a field, the sense of being somewhere far from the noise of things. Her car, a 1996 Saturn, left the road at a curve and came to rest against a snowbank at the edge of the pavement. A local man named Butch Atwood, who was a school bus driver and who lived just nearby, noticed the car and stopped. He later described speaking briefly with Maura through the window, and he said that she seemed physically uninjured, that she was calm in her manner, that she declined his offer to call for help, and that she told him she had already made a call. Atwood drove on to his home and then, out of continued concern, phoned 911 on her behalf. When a police officer arrived at the scene, a matter of less than 15 minutes later, the car was there, its hazard lights still blinking in the cold dark, and Maura was not. She was not on the road beside the car. She was not in the nearby trees. She was not at the handful of homes in the surrounding area. The road was quiet and cold and held only the empty car with its steady blinking lights. The search effort that unfolded over the following days was considerable. The area around the crash site was examined thoroughly. Search dogs were brought in and worked the area around the road and into the forest on both sides. Volunteers joined the professional search teams. The investigation expanded outward in careful stages, checking the seasonal cabins and the outbuildings in the long, dense stretches of forest that define that part of New Hampshire. Nothing was found that led clearly in any particular direction. Over the years since 2004, the disappearance of Maura Murray has become one of the more thoroughly documented, unsolved cases in the United States. Books have been written with careful attention to the available facts. Podcast series have returned to the case over many episodes, examining each element from multiple angles. Online communities have dedicated considerable time and energy to reviewing everything that is known and carefully working through various possible explanations. Former law enforcement professionals have taken an interest in the case during their retirement. The sustained and widespread attention the case has received over more than 2 decades is perhaps a reflection of how specific its details are, specific enough to invite analysis, while remaining at every significant point genuinely inconclusive. The last confirmed image of Maura on any surveillance camera was recorded at a liquor store in Hadley, Massachusetts, earlier on the day of her disappearance. The receipt from that purchase, the timing of the transaction, and the route she would have taken from there toward New Hampshire, all of it has been examined many times by people who study the case and who continue to find it worth returning to. There are, as there always are with a case that has remained open for a long time, a number of different theories about what happened after Butch Atwood drove away from the side of Route 112 and the cold night closed back over the empty road. Some researchers believe that something happened to Maura after she left the car, that someone came along and that whatever followed was not something she had chosen or intended. Some believe she walked into the forest on her own, for reasons that belonged entirely to her. Some believe she is alive somewhere, living quietly under a different name, having made a choice that was hers alone to make. The investigators who have worked the case over the years have never arrived at a point where they could say with any certainty which of these, or any other possibility, reflects what actually happened. Her family has continued through the years to ask for information, to maintain a presence in efforts to keep the case visible, and to hold open the hope that something new will eventually surface. The investigation, according to the New Hampshire State Police, has never been closed. Maura Murray was a young woman whose life contained, as most lives do, considerably more complexity than was apparent from the outside. She drove north on a cold February night along a quiet road through dark forest, and then she was simply not there anymore. The road was empty, the car was empty, and whatever the forest on either side of Route 112 observed of that night, it has kept to itself across all the years since. We do not need to understand this tonight. We can simply hold the image very gently. The blinking hazard lights, the still and empty road, the dark trees, the cold air, and allow it to be what it is, a question, resting quietly in the dark, patient and entirely at peace with remaining open. Case 3. Lars Mitank, Varna, Bulgaria, 2014. Lars Mitank was 28 years old in the summer of 2014, a young German man who had traveled with a group of friends to the city of Varna on the Black Sea coast of Bulgaria for a summer holiday. His disappearance is somewhat unusual among the cases we are visiting tonight in that a portion of what happened, the visible portion, the part that occurred in a public space, was captured on airport security cameras, creating a short visual record that has been watched and studied many times in the years since. Varna is a city that fills with visitors during the summer months. The Black Sea along that stretch of coast is warm and calm in July, and the days are long and bright in the way that late summer days in that part of Europe tend to be. The seafront promenade would have been busy with people in the particular unhurried state that characterizes a summer by the sea. People walking slowly, sitting in cafes in the shade, spending time in the water, moving through long days that are not organized around much beyond the quiet pleasure of being somewhere different and warm. Lars and his friends would have been part of this general atmosphere, spending their days as people on summer holiday do, and the trip was, for its first portion, entirely ordinary. Toward the end of the holiday, Lars was involved in a small physical altercation, a brief and not especially serious incident connected to a football match, and he sustained an injury to his ear that was significant enough that a doctor advised him not to fly until it had healed further, on account of the pressure changes involved in air travel. His friends, whose travel arrangements could not easily be altered, flew home to Germany as planned, and Lars remained in Varna alone, settled into a hotel near the beach, waiting for his ear to heal well enough for him to return. He was in contact with his mother during this period, and the messages he sent her were, initially, calm and unremarkable. The messages of someone who was mildly inconvenienced and was simply waiting out a few extra days before coming home. He told her he would be home soon, and then gradually the quality of his communications changed. In the day or two before he disappeared, Lars reached out to his mother in a way that was clearly different from his earlier messages. He told her he was frightened. He said he felt that someone was trying to harm him, that he did not feel safe in the hotel where he was staying. He made a request that she found very difficult to understand. He asked her to cancel his health insurance, and the combination of this request with his expressed fear created for her a sense that something was not right. The nature of what Lars believed was happening to him, who he felt was threatening him, or why, was not entirely clear from what he communicated, and this ambiguity has remained at the center of the case. The question of whether Lars was perceiving something real in his environment during those final days, or whether something in his thinking and perception had shifted in ways that were not visible to anyone around him. On the morning of July 8, 2014, Lars arrived at Varna Airport. The security footage from that morning shows him moving through the terminal in a way that is visibly different from the ease of ordinary travel. He appeared agitated, his movements carrying a quality of alertness or apprehension that was noticeable to the people who reviewed the footage afterward. He visited the airport medical center, where he spoke with a doctor about his ear, and then he left the medical center in a way that seemed abrupt, almost as though something had startled or unsettled him. The camera footage then captured him in the departures area, moving through the space with an increasing sense of urgency, and then, in the moment that has been watched and revisited many times, climbing over a low perimeter fence at the edge of the airport grounds and running out into an open field that lay beyond it. The footage has the quality that security camera footage always has. Slightly washed out, the figure small within the larger frame of the image, the colors muted, and it shows Lars moving across the field and then passing beyond the edge of what the camera could see. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. The field beyond the airport perimeter led toward an area of trees and farmland, and the searches conducted in the days following his disappearance covered a considerable stretch of that surrounding countryside. Nothing was found. His belongings, his passport, his luggage, the practical contents of his stay, were found at the hotel. His phone and his bank cards showed no activity after the morning he disappeared. In the years since 2014, both German and Bulgarian authorities have been involved in the investigation. Private individuals and small groups have traveled to Varna specifically to search and to look for anything that earlier searches may have missed. His family, and particularly his mother, has remained engaged in efforts to find him, and the case has attracted sustained attention in Germany, where it has been covered repeatedly in the media. The brief footage of Lars crossing the fence and running across the field has prompted a great deal of quiet and careful thought about what he might have been experiencing in those moments, what he saw or felt, what he understood to be true about the world around him in those particular seconds. Physicians and psychologists who have considered the case have speculated about what might cause a person to behave in that way, about the kinds of experiences emerging sometimes from illness, from isolation, from the particular vulnerability of being alone and unwell in an unfamiliar place, that can fundamentally alter a person's perception of what is safe and what is threatening. His family has said that Lars, as they knew him, had not had a history of significant mental health difficulties, though they have also acknowledged that people can change in ways that are not always visible until something happens. The field beyond the airport is quiet now, most likely, in the way that fields near cities tend to be quiet after the morning activity has passed. The grass moving a little in whatever comes off the sea, the trees at the farther edge standing as they have always stood, patient and still and indifferent to the particular history of one July morning. Whatever Lars Mittank was running toward or running away from on that morning in 2014 remains, to this day, unknown. There is something about this case that invites a particular quality of stillness. A young man on an ordinary summer holiday, resting by the sea, waiting simply to be well enough to fly home. And then somewhere in the days of that waiting, something changed in how the world appeared to him, and he ran across a field at an airport and disappeared into a landscape that has offered no further account of him. We do not need to understand it tonight. We can hold the image very gently. The open field, the summer light, the figure growing small and then gone, and allow it simply to be. Case 4, Sneha Ann Phillip, New York City, 2001. Sneha. Ann Phillip was 32 years old in September of 2001, and she was a physician, a medical doctor who had completed her training and who was working in New York City, having built, through years of sustained and serious effort, a professional life of real substance and significance. She had grown up in a family of Indian heritage, had attended and completed medical school, had married, and was living in Lower Manhattan in a neighborhood where the particular texture of city life, the density and the noise, and the way that thousands of individual lives brush against one another in the narrow streets without ever fully knowing one another, was simply the ordinary background of her days. By most of the visible measures of a life observed from the outside, she had arrived at a place of considerable structure and forward momentum. On September 10th, 2001, the day before the attacks on the World Trade Center, Sneha was captured on security footage inside a department store in Lower Manhattan. The footage, reviewed carefully in the months following her disappearance, showed her moving through the store for a prolonged period of time, browsing in the unhurried way of someone with time to spend. After she left the store, the record of where she went and what happened to her becomes unclear. She did not return home that evening. Her husband reported her missing the following morning, which was September 11th. The timing of her disappearance places it in immediate proximity to one of the most significant and sorrowful events in modern American history, and this proximity has shaped the case in ways that are worth acknowledging with care. In the immediate and chaotic aftermath of the attacks on the World Trade Center, when the names and fates of thousands of people were still unresolved and the process of accounting for everyone was enormous and overwhelmed, Sneha's name appeared among those listed as potentially missing in connection with the site. The possibility that she had gone there, a physician, someone trained to help, someone who might have heard what was happening and moved toward it the way that medical professionals sometimes do, out of training and instinct and commitment, was taken seriously and investigated. It could not be confirmed. The records of who was present at the site in those first hours and days were not, in the circumstances, always complete or reliable. The investigation into what had happened to Sneha became gradually more textured as the weeks and months after her disappearance brought more information to light about the period before she went missing. There had been some professional difficulties in the months preceding her disappearance, a situation involving her hospital that had led to a period away from her position. There were indications that she had been navigating some significant pressures in her personal life as well. The picture that emerged slowly and in pieces was of a person who was carrying more internal weight than the visible structures of her accomplished professional life might have suggested. A legal process unfolded in the years following her disappearance. Questions about how her case should be formally classified, whether she had disappeared willingly or whether something had happened to her, and whether any connection to the events of September 11th could be established. A court eventually reached a conclusion on those questions, a conclusion that was accepted by some of the people involved and contested by others. Her husband maintained through many years that Sneha had gone to help at the World Trade Center site and should be considered among those lost in the attacks. Others who studied the case suggested that her disappearance predated the morning of September 11th and that the timing, however striking, was coincidental rather than connected. The absence of any confirmed sighting of Sneha after the department store footage on September 10th and the continued absence of any conclusive evidence connecting her to the World Trade Center site have left the case resting in an unresolved space, a place where more than one explanation remains possible and where none can be established with certainty. New York City in September 2001 was a place experiencing something of enormous weight, and individual stories, even ones as particular and specific as Sneha Phillips, were sometimes partially obscured by the scale of everything that was happening around them. Her story is both its own thing and also, inevitably, held within a much larger story, and sorting those two things from each other has been one of the ongoing difficulties of understanding what happened. She was a doctor. She had worked hard across many years to become what she was. She walked out of a department store on a warm September evening and did not come home. What happened in the hours that followed, in the last quiet hours before the city changed, is something that the available evidence has not yet been able to explain. Sneha Phillips' story rests within a larger story, the way that individual lives are always contained within and shaped by the larger movements of the world around them. The way that personal mysteries can become entangled with collective ones in ways that make them harder to see clearly. She was a person with her own history and her own circumstances, and she disappeared at a moment when the city she lived in was on the edge of something that would change every life within it. We hold her story with particular softness tonight: the September evening, the quiet city, the question of where she went, and we allow it to rest. Case 5, Tiffany Valiante, New Jersey, 2015. Tiffany Valiante was 18 years old in the summer of 2015, and she had recently graduated from high school in Mays Landing, New Jersey, a small and quiet town set in the flat pine country of the southern part of the state. She was, by the accounts of the people who knew and loved her, a young woman who was full of warmth and life, someone who was vivid and present in the way that young people often are when they are standing right at the threshold of what their life is going to become. The particular quality of that threshold, being 18 in the summer after high school, with the fall and everything it holds just ahead, carries its own specific kind of openness, a sense that the whole shape of the next part of life is still forming and unwritten, that the doors are not yet closed in any direction. On the evening of July 12, 2015, Tiffany was at home for a gathering. Friends and family, a warm summer evening of the kind that the pine country of southern New Jersey hosts easily, the air soft and full of the sounds of insects and whatever breeze moves through the trees at that time of year. At some point during the evening, something shifted in the way that things sometimes shift at gatherings. A disagreement, a difficult exchange, the particular kind of sadness that can settle over a person suddenly in the middle of what is meant to be a pleasant time. What exactly happened is something that different accounts have described in different ways, and the exact details have not been agreed upon by everyone involved. What is known with certainty is that Tiffany left the house on foot, alone, at some point in the night, and walked out into the warm July darkness. The landscape around Mays Landing is a particular kind of quiet. Southern New Jersey in that region is flat and open in places and thickly forested in others, the pine trees standing close and making a kind of privacy with their density, the ground sandy underfoot in a way that muffles footsteps. At night, the area is genuinely dark in the stretches between the scattered houses, and the sounds are the sounds of the pine barrens, the steady high drone of summer insects, the occasional rustling of something moving through the underbrush, the distant sound of a vehicle on a road somewhere. It is not an unfriendly landscape, but it is a private one. And moving through it alone in the middle of the night would mean moving through a great deal of darkness and quiet. Tiffany's body was found the following morning on a set of active railroad tracks, some distance from her home, and the formal determination that was reached by the authorities who examined the scene was that she had been struck by a train. That determination stands as the official conclusion. And yet the case has not fully settled in the minds of all the people who have examined it, and Tiffany Valiante's story continues to be returned to by those who study unexplained or disputed cases, because certain details of the circumstances, the distance from her home, the particular path she would have needed to travel to arrive at the place where she was found, the specific details of the scene itself, have struck some researchers and some investigators as difficult to fully account for within a straightforward reading of events. Her family has carried, through all the years since July of 2015, a weight of unresolved questions about what happened to her that night and about whether the conclusions that were reached fully and accurately reflect the truth of what occurred. Her parents have spoken publicly about their concerns. They have advocated for a more thorough re-examination of the circumstances. Their presence in the ongoing conversation about the case has been consistent and heartfelt, and it reflects the particular kind of grief that comes not only from the loss of someone beloved, but from the feeling that the loss has not been fully understood or properly accounted for. It is worth holding this case with a particular and deliberate tenderness because it sits at the crossing point between a disappearance and a death, a place where the mystery carries a weight that is different from the other cases we have visited tonight, where the question is not only where someone went, but what truly happened to them, and whether the explanation that exists is sufficient and accurate. For a family, that distinction is not small. She was 18 years old. She had just finished school. She walked out into a warm summer night in the place where she had grown up, and the morning came and she was gone. There is a particular quality to Tiffany's story that asked for a kind of extra care in the way we hold it. The youth and the openness of her life at that moment, the warmth of the summer evening, the July darkness of the New Jersey pine country. She was at the very beginning of what was meant to be a long life, and she walked out into a night that did not give her back. The questions her family continues to carry are not abstract ones. They are the daily presence of someone missing and imperfectly explained. We hold this story with great gentleness and with a quiet acknowledgement that some mysteries are not only questions without answers, they are the living grief of the people who love someone and still do. Reflections on uncertainty. There is something that all 5 of these stories share, and it is not only the bare fact of disappearance, it is something subtler and more human than that. Something about the way that ordinary life contains within it, at all times and without any warning, these quiet thresholds, these moments of transition where a person moves from the recorded and the known into a space that is simply, and in many cases, permanently unclear. Brian Schaffer walked back through a door into a building full of people. Maura Murray stepped out of a car onto a cold and empty road. Lars Middink ran across a field toward a line of trees. Sneha Phillip walked out of a department store into a September evening. Tiffany Valiante stepped off a porch into a warm July night. Each of these moments, considered on its own, has almost no weight to it. It is the kind of transition that every person makes dozens of times every day, moving from one space to another without any sense that the movement carries significance. It is only in retrospect and from the outside that these moments become the last visible moments, the edge of what is known. The families and friends who have lived with these open questions over the years describe a relationship with uncertainty that changes slowly and substantially with time. In the early period, the first days and weeks after a disappearance, the uncertainty is close and pressing, almost physical in its quality, demanding resolution, demanding action, demanding that the not knowing be converted as quickly as possible into knowing. But as time passes, and as investigations reach their various limits, and as the urgency of the search gives way to the long patience of the ongoing inquiry, the relationship to not knowing shifts into something different. It becomes a kind of companion rather than an emergency, something that is carried alongside ordinary life, rather than interrupting it at every moment. The question is still there. The love and the hope and the need to know are still there. They have simply settled as grief settles over time into the texture of everyday things, becoming part of the landscape of a life rather than the emergency in its foreground. There is something quietly instructive available in sitting with things that have not been resolved if we allow ourselves to receive it. It is not the instruction of giving up or of ceasing to care. The families of these 5 individuals continue to care deeply, continue to hold open the hope that something will shift, continue to make space for the possibility of an answer. It is something gentler and more spacious than that. It is perhaps the instruction that a question can remain a question for a very long time, across years and decades, without that openness being a failure, that the world contains things that are not yet explained, and perhaps things that will never be fully explained, and that this is not a deficiency in the world or in the people who have tried to understand it. It is simply what it means to be in a universe that is larger and more intricate and more full of the particular lives of individual people than any single investigation or any single mind can entirely hold. The 5 people whose stories we have rested with tonight, Brian, Maura, Lars, Sneha, Tiffany, were each living a particular and unrepeatable life, with particular habits and relationships and interior experiences that no one else shared completely. Each of them moved at some moment beyond the edge of what is documented and known, and they have remained there. They are held, each of them, in the warm and ongoing memory of the people who love them, in the photographs kept and the birthdays remembered, and the small daily moments when someone thinks of them without particular reason, and in the careful files of the investigators who have tried to find them, and in the quiet and respectful attention of the people who return to their stories with genuine care. Closing, letting it all rest. The night is quiet now, wherever you are. The words have been passing through you for some time, and perhaps some of them have already dissolved and become part of the soft, formless texture of the space just before sleep. Phrases and images arriving and departing without leaving anything that needs to be held on to or examined. This is exactly as it should be, and exactly what was intended. The stories we have moved through tonight do not require anything more of you. They have been offered in the way that quiet things are offered in the night, without expectation, without urgency, simply as a way of giving the hours before sleep something gentle and unhurried to rest against. The 5 people we have spent some time with tonight: a medical student in Columbus, a student and runner in New Hampshire, a young man on a summer holiday near the Black Sea, a physician in Lower Manhattan, a girl newly finished with school in southern New Jersey, are each, in their own particular way, part of the vast and quiet record of lives that have been lived. Some of what they experienced and felt and did is known and documented, held in files and photographs and the recollections of the people who were there. Some of it is not known and may never be. And this in some measure is true of every person. The full interior of a human life is never completely visible, never entirely on the record. There are always rooms that no one else has entered. There is always more to any person than what can be seen or known from outside. We are all in some sense partly unknown, even to those who love us most. And this is not something to be troubled by. It is simply part of what it means to be a person. There is something soft and even comforting in this, if you allow yourself to feel it slowly and without effort. The mystery is not only in the disappearances, it is present in all of it, in the ordinary days, in the quiet and unremarkable evenings, in the moments that pass without being captured on any camera and without being recalled by any witness, in the hours of interior experience that belong only to each individual person and that move through a life leaving no trace in the external world. Every life contains enormous amounts of this unwitnessed, unrecorded experience, and this does not make those lives any less fully real or any less significant or any less worthy of being held with care. It simply means that being human is, always and in every case and for every person, somewhat more mysterious than it appears. Fully come, and the night is doing what fully come, and the night is doing what nights do with their particular and reliable kindness, softening the edges of things, making the shapes of the waking world less defined and less insistent, creating a space in which the mind can begin to let go of its hold on everything it has been holding. There is nothing you need to resolve or understand before sleep comes to find you. The questions of the day, the questions in these stories, the questions that have been quietly sitting in you since long before tonight, all of them can rest now, exactly where they are, patient and unchanged, not going anywhere, perfectly content to wait. The darkness in the room is the same darkness that has always been there, kind and neutral and entirely without agenda. The same darkness that has held you on many other nights before this one. The sounds around you, whatever the sounds of your particular place are at this hour, the small and familiar sounds of a space at rest, are not asking anything of you. They are simply the background of a night passing, quiet and ordinary and safe. You can allow your thoughts to become softer now, less formed, less like sentences, and more like the vague and shifting impressions that come in the shallows before sleep. Images that arrive without context, feelings without clear source, the sense of drifting that is not disorienting but easy, like being carried very gently somewhere you have always been going. There is nothing to correct. There is nothing to redirect. The feeling of floating a little away from things is the right feeling. It is the beginning of where you are going, and it is very gentle, and it is very easy, and it does not require anything from you except the simple and entirely available willingness to release whatever you are still holding. Somewhere out there, files remain open on desks and in cabinets. Questions rest in folders. People continue their quiet and patient and faithful work of remembering and hoping and searching. None of it needs to be resolved tonight. The world will continue its slow and steady work, and the questions will remain in their places, and the night will pass as nights always pass, gradually and without hurry, and the morning will come in its own time, when it is ready, soft and unhurried. For now there is only this, the soft weight of your body resting, the quiet rhythm of your breathing, slower now and slower still, the darkness that is around you and holding you without requiring anything in return, the silence that is simply here, as it has always been here, waiting for you without impatience. Sleep well. The night is long and very gentle, and you are entirely safe. And the questions, all of them, every last one, can wait.